Thank you for coming. I wanted to start by explaining why it is I have the pleasure of interviewing Michael this evening. I would direct your attention to the dust jacket of your book, the back. And there's a blurb here that reads, "I read Michael Lewis for the same reason I watch Tiger Woods. I'll never play like that, but it's good to be reminded every now and again about what genius looks like. Malcolm Gladwell." And my question is, who's more shameless? Me for writing that, or you for putting it on your book?
I just stopped them from putting it in an ad because they're wearing it out. It was kind of you to say it, and we both know it's not completely true. But it's
there is a place for hyperbole, and yes. I believe it's the back jacket of books. I have a theory. I have a grand, unified Michael Lewis theory, and I thought that we would start there.
I haven't heard it. I'd love to hear it.
And I'm going to. This is going to be. I would like to see whether you get the theory. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer. You'll see. The theory, the preamble to the theory is that you are principally a moralist. In fact, I believe you are America's leading nonfiction moralist.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you are someone who explores deeply moral themes. And as proof, I would like to point out that in five of your best-selling books are essentially biblical allegories. Starting with, I want to see if you can guess the biblical allegory. How good is your...
You know, it's very funny you're saying this. I mean, I did think of this one as an allegory, but it wasn't the Bible.
No. It's
all the Bible. Let's just get it out there. Let's get it out there. Get it over with.
Okay. Liar's Poker is what biblical story? It's Daniel in the lion's den. You're Daniel.
Right.
You descend into the lion's den where you are beset by large beasts who you hold at bay. Right? Duh. Okay. Moneyball is the easy one. Moneyball is David and Goliath, of course.
But a lot of them are David and Goliath.
No, that's not true. That's not
yes.
true. The Blind Side is the Good Samaritan, right? Quite literally the Good Samaritan.
That's very true.
They spot the kid by the side of the road.
Yes.
I mean, it's the same story, right? Big Short, Noah's Ark. Right?
There was only one of each kind in my story.
Well, no. What do these guys do? These traders do. They take refuge against the coming storm by building themselves what? An ark, a financial ark. Perfect. Okay, so, but Flash Boys it's the most perfect biblical allegory of all. Which one is it? Do you know?
I have no idea.
It's Jesus and the money changers in the temple.
Ooh.
My Father's house is a place of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves, Jesus said. Flash Boys. I got the book and I was like, where is the biblical epigraph from Matthew? Like for Matthew 1, whatever it is, 24. Couldn't find it. It's like,
you know, what I want to know is why I don't feel better understood than I felt 2 minutes before. but it's okay. I mean,
you're not disputing that there is a deeply moral center to all of your books?
There's certainly, in this case, it is more moralistic, I think, than many of the things I've written. But I think
they're all. I think they're all moralistic.
It's probably hard to write without filtering it through some sort of moral sensibility. It's on the surface more in this book because it's on the surface with the characters. Mm-hmm. A lot of my characters don't feel that way about the world around them. In this case, you have a Canadian, such as yourself, who walks into the American finance, and what he finds eventually appalls him because he's Canadian. It's that he is so clearly not just appalled, but he has such a clear sense of right and wrong, and what's going on is wrong, and he's going to fix it, is a little different for me. It's harder to make swing on the page than some ambiguity.
Yeah.
I felt that many of my characters have had a lot of moral ambiguity about them. He has less than anyone I've ever written.
I'll grant that. But you surely aren't saying. I mean, I find that same, as I just explained, I find that same moral centeredness in. Think of the characters in those 5 books.
Well, they're all in some way in opposition to the world around them.
Yes.
It's absolutely true.
And they all have a moral position on the world around them.
What is Billy Bean's moral position?
We're going to get to that in a moment, but he has a moral position, and that is that Moneyball is an argument about privilege, right? On one level. It's a book. To me, it was a book about privilege.
I think of it as a book about value, and about how I think about it is a book about how much difficulty markets have placing value on human beings. But Billy Bean didn't think of it that way. Billy Bean could have given a rat's ass about things like that. I mean, he thought of it as a book about war, his war against the world around him. But he wasn't thinking really right and wrong in a moral way. He was thinking right and wrong, like my math is better than your math.
I know, but you don't think there's a moral dimension to someone who says we have fundamentally misunderstood people's true value in the world?
I say that.
Yes.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Oh yeah, but he didn't write the book.
Yeah, that's true. So no, I think it is true that, but I don't think this makes me unusual as a writer.
No.
It is true that what causes you to pick up to sit at your machine and type words out in the first place? It's some sense of like something's wrong or the world misperceives something.
Yeah.
You have a sense of a view of events that feels, at least to you, perhaps erroneously fresh, different, and often that view is driven by some moral concern. I think that's fair. I'm not sure I'm more this way than other people. Do you think I am?
Oh,
I mean, it's interesting.
Heavily.
Really?
But before I want to point out, to go back to your characters again. I think that if you list them, Leanne Toohey, Steve Eisenman, and Michael Burry, and in Big Short, Billy Bean, Brad, whatever his last name. How do you pronounce his last name? Katsuyama in this book. Even Maury Taylor. They all have. There's a common thread that runs through them, don't you think?
What I said before is true. They're all in opposition to the world around them. Every one of those people. But they aren't. I mean, look, everybody's got a moral position even by default. But I mean, let's take a character like Michael Burry in The Big Short. He's someone who goes into finance after he abandons medicine because he realizes, as he said, I care about people, but not really. And is so indifferent to his fellow human beings that he takes refuge in numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess that's a moral position, but it isn't, I think most people think of as a moralistic character.
Yeah, but the point I thought when I read that what was so moving I found Michael Burry to be very moving.
Me too.
Yeah. I found it moving because you did.
But this is true. Can I interrupt you for a sec?
Sure.
All right, I'm trying to find some truth in what you just said. And I'm doing my best here. My wheels are spinning. I mean, there is some truth. It's true that I have no interest in writing a book unless I feel something. At the bottom of all of them is emotion. It's absolutely true. So I write about often very dry things: baseball statistics, subprime mortgage crisis, high-frequency trading. Who cares, really? I mean, if you had told me, if all I knew was that the stock market was rigged, and here's how it's rigged, and Michael, you can go explain to the world how it's rigged, and no one else knows, I'm not even sure I would have had interest. I don't care that much that the stock market's rigged. I mean, I care a little bit, but I don't care enough to sit down and write about it. What I care about is that this character walks into this world, discovers it's rigged, and how he behaves once he has the understanding. And the moral choices he makes, no question about it. And that engages my emotions. That's what causes me to care about the story. So I have to feel something.
Yeah.
And it's funny, and it is true. I would also say it's true that what I feel is quixotic sometimes. I was sitting there watching, I realized this when I had my 7-year-old on my lap, and I was watching the 60 Minutes show about the story 2 Sundays ago. And I realized I was crying. I had tears coursing down my face. I was kind of embarrassed because it's like just computers and numbers and all the rest. But I was crying because I could see the character of the guy I wrote about, of Brad Katsuyama, on the screen, displayed so clearly. And I found that character moving. So it is being moved by things that causes me to put any effort into this.
Were you more moved by his character than some of your previous heroes?
I find all of them kind of moving. I mean, he was. I like brave people, and a lot of my characters are brave. He is. I will say that what he has done is peculiarly brave because he's brought on the wrath of the gods. I mean, he really has. He's gone to war with his own industry in a way. Billy Beane didn't even do until the book came out. I mean, Billy Beane was forced into that position by the book. Brad Katsuyama went into war with the industry all by himself. So I find him as a character, because he isn't by nature a troublemaker, by nature someone who goes out of his way to antagonize systems. I find that moving, that he was forced by circumstances to make choices that were really almost unnatural to him, to step outside of a system in which he was quite comfortable personally, in response to a moral reaction he had. So he's almost forced into the role, and that once forced in the role, he behaved so bravely. What I had in mind when I finished this book, I had this strange feeling that I had read this book I just wrote. What is this reminding me of? And it took me a while to put my finger on it, but here you had this character, Brad Katsuyama, who had was sitting in the middle of this great war, and the war was between people with money to invest and the people who were mishandling the money, the middlemen and the investors. A war that none of them really wanted in some way, but now is happening. He was in the middle. And he's short, very short. And he's in some ways a reluctant, a middleman in this world, a reluctant participant. And I thought, oh my God, I've just written Lord of the Rings. He's Frodo. and I think of him as Frodo. That he's got in a Frodo-like way. He's got a Frodo-like situation. And I find his bravery, like Frodo's bravery.
What does it say about the difference between you and me that I'm immediately drawn to the story of the most dramatic story in the New Testament, and you think of Lord of the Rings?
You were raised with religion.
No, I have much grander aspirations for your imagination than you do. Why are you settling for children's literature?
I think the Lord of the Rings is pretty terrific. It actually doesn't reread very well, but when I read it the first time, I thought it was pretty terrific. So I think of anyway. So what do all these people have in common? All these people have in common they're troublemakers in their environment. They're disruptive in some way or other. They have problems with their environment, all of which is really useful in describing the environment. They're all characters in situations. Beyond that,
what is it about you that is drawn to that specific profile?
You know, it's funny. Malcolm and I have done this once before, a long time ago. You won't remember because there were 6 people in a Barnes & Noble in New York when The Blind Side came out. The Blind Side came out, and you were perplexed that all of my books seemed to be the work of kind of basically someone who has radical hostility towards the world around him, and you couldn't understand because I had rich parents. I was raised by people who loved me.
Look at you in your seersucker
and
and your blonde hair.
like this. And then I'm sorry. It says what he said. What is it was where does this hidden neurosis come from? Is basically your question, and I don't know if I answered you properly at the time, but if I had to put, I don't know if there's a good answer. It's probably it's partly how in some way I'm wired. I don't look the way I'm wired, but I do think that it helps me as a writer that I grew up in a world that I loved. I grew up in New Orleans. That was and it was a world that was outside in many ways American culture, and American culture was clearly hostile to it in the sense that it was not going to survive American culture. And a lot of things I valued in that world were crumbling before my eyes. So I could see that my father's way of life was unsustainable, for example. I think that probably helped.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, what kind of... What
was unsustainable about your father's life?
Well, it was unsustainable not to care very much what you did for a living or get your status from your achievements in the world as opposed to just your personal relationships from your family. It was not a success culture. It really, people were largely indifferent to what other people did to make a living and much more focused on family relationships. And there was kind of an ironic twist or an ironic strain in life, a kind of detachment, amusement, a gift for creating, the culture had a gift for creating wonderful moments. And it wasn't, there was a naturalness about it. I just felt that, but it was not a successful place. It was a failed place in many ways, and you could see that. A kid could see that, and you could see that, you could see that even the things you loved were not sustainable. And so I think, so it makes you question. Makes you question success when something you feel is very successful at a very deep emotional level is by the standards of the world a failure. I think that that probably has something to do with how I approach subjects, but I don't know how much. I mean, the answer to the question may be I'm just actually basically lazy, and that it's much easier to write a story about a disruptive person in an environment than it is to do, say, the kind of thing you do, where you actually have to, think through the idea very clearly from beginning to end, as opposed to use a character to walk you from beginning to end. I mean,
We've had this conversation before. I maintain
you think what I do is harder, but I don't.
Way
think
harder.
Yeah, I think so. To tie these two things together, the Lewis family motto. I kid you not. When I was growing up, my father said on the coat of arms, passed down from generation to generation, was this: do as little as possible, and that unwillingly. There's more. For it is better to receive a slight reprimand than to perform an arduous task. And I thought that was serious. I mean, I thought that made total sense to me. And so when my writing life, there is influenced by that kind of approach to it. I mean, I don't look for trouble or hard things to do. I look for things I can do without too much trouble. And I think
you understand that you're making no sense whatsoever right now. This is
why
you are, first of all, insanely prolific.
Yeah, but it's not hard.
That does not make me feel better, by the way.
But once I find a story that engages me, and a character in a situation that engages me, it's very easy. I mean, I have to spend time with him, which to other people might be onerous, and I have to kind of learn some things. But if the situation and the character is right, the rest often just kind of takes care of itself. And so maybe it's just for me, maybe given my proclivities. Maybe it's just what I am doing as a writer is finding the path of least resistance. And that's
which of your books was the hardest
to write? Probably the new thing. And it's a good way to judge them. You know, when I think back on them, I think of them almost like Olympic dives. You have to have the degree of difficulty as well as the execution. And the degree of difficulty was high there because I had a character I knew the reader wasn't going to feel. The whole point of the character is he's incredibly uncomfortable to be with. That he doesn't, the minute you get settled, he unsettles. So he never gives you a place to rest. And it's the culture of Silicon Valley embodied in a person. And that's very hard to make, it's very hard he doesn't form attachments. It's very hard for the reader to form an attachment with him. And so that was, I think, probably the hardest. This one and The Big Short had these technical details that were difficult to kind of bring across a bit. It's hard. It's basically impossible to describe a collateralized debt obligation. I mean, no matter what you do, the best you hope for, and there's some of this in here, is that you fool people into thinking they understand it. And so when they put the book down, they say, I got that. And they go tell people they understood it, but they don't really understand it. And so you have to give up artfully with some things. And so that was true in this case too. There are some places where I just hope the reader felt they didn't want to know anymore. But they're all. I mean, I find the hard part of these things is structure. It's finding like what is the way to tell the story. Once you find the way to tell the story, it just tends to kind of almost write itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And by the way, which was the easiest? Lowest degree of difficulty?
Liar's Poker, because it was just about me. I was so vastly amused by myself too, and it never. I mean, I'm told this is true. My wife Tabitha tells me that. So I write with headphones on, and I listen to music, and I will listen to the same song over and over and over on a loop, just because it shuts out everything else. I wrote an entire chapter of this book to the Let It Go, the song from Frozen, just over and over. I felt like it was like an insane person. When I walk the world and I hear that song, I just start to write because I get so used to but Liar's Poker, I'm told, she tells me that when I'm sitting there with my headphones, I'm cackling I'm laughing at my own jokes. And with Liar's Poker, I'd never written a book. I've written very few magazine pieces even. I had no sense there would be actually a critical reaction to this except we love it. And so it didn't occur to me to have the fears, anxieties, anything. Yeah. It was just easy.
Do you have any fears or anxiety?
Of course.
What are they?
Well, I think I fear, I mean, maybe not as much as some, but I fear the disapproval of others. And, it's not nice to get bad reviews. Beyond that, I mean, in my literary life,
we have a lot of time. You want to think about.
I think.
Can you come up with something that's even remotely not?
Probably not. Probably not. I don't feel. So I think you must be this way too. There are layers of insecurity underneath and layers of confidence. At the bottom is confidence. I know at bottom I'm not really that worried about anything when I write. I don't worry it's going to be bad, really. I think that if I work hard enough at it, it's going to be fine, but usually it comes very easily, so I don't even get that far. I don't, it's problematic, right? Because writers are supposed to be tortured and miserable and poor, and I'm none of those. I'm very happy, more or less well-adjusted, plenty rich, I'm at peace with the world around me, more or less. So I'm sorry I can't give you what you need here.
No. I'm not requiring. No, I find this deeply refreshing. Our mutual friend, another Michael, told me the key to understanding you is that the commencement address you gave at Princeton several years ago, which I read this afternoon.
2 years ago, yeah.
2 years ago, which I read this afternoon.
From the pulpit in the church. It was the first time I'd ever been in the church, much less the pulpit. But yeah.
And can you describe a little bit of what that commencement address was about? And then do you agree that there is something Do you agree that it encapsulates something real about the way you see the world?
Yes.
Central.
So you have 12 minutes to address the undergraduates and not bore them. And it was kind of funny. Princeton is such a small world. I got up, I realized that this address I gave had been given since 1798, and every class gets it. So I had to have gotten it when I was graduating from Princeton. And I don't even remember it being even the event, much less the speaker and what he said. And so I started by saying that I must have sat there in these pews and listened to some old guy tell you something. And I don't even remember even being here, so you won't remember this. And it turns out the guy who gave the speech when I was when I was a senior was in the audience because he had a grandchild graduating from Princeton. And I got this nice note from a lady 2 days later saying, Charlie was there, my husband Charlie was there, and he thought it was really very funny that you didn't remember what he said. But would you like to come to dinner? So they've actually become friends. So the theme of the speech was the role of luck in life, accident in life, and that the people in the audience, probably even more so than when I was graduating from Princeton, think of themselves as deserving of everything that comes to them because they've passed through this ruthless meritocratic filter. They've gotten the right board scores, they've gotten the right grades, everybody tells them they're there because they deserve to be there, and so on and so forth. Where I was under no illusion of that. I knew that I was there because my father had gone to Princeton. And so I didn't think I'd actually even deserve to be there. I thought it was a privilege to be there. But because they were programmed the way they're programmed now, I thought it was important to tell them how much luck was involved in them being there and how much luck would be involved in whatever happened to them afterwards. And that it wasn't just enough to appreciate their luck, that they owed a debt to the unlucky. Mm-hmm. And it was a way, what I was doing is smuggling back into Princeton, the idea of noblesse oblige, which is an idea I grew up with, which is, it's one of those ways that to redress the inequality in the society is for the people who are the elites to think a little bit about their responsibility to the people who are not, rather than just coast on the fact they're elite. Mm-hmm. Part of the outrage of the story of this book is elites are doing the opposite. Elites are instead of taking a kind of responsibility for the rest of the society, are scamming it. It's good to get to know the audience, isn't it? Just kind of know which way they're going to drift. So I think we're drifting left in here. But it happened. It was true that this theme tied into some of my books. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that Moneyball was. Part of Moneyball is the Oakland A's figuring out how much luck there is in a baseball career and trying to strip out the luck to get to the true value of the player, but how hard that is to do. So I was trying to bring that across to them, mm-hmm. and mm-hmm. I'm sure they've forgotten it already. Their parents may not have known.
Yeah. But do you think that idea, aside from Moneyball, has that idea surfaced in? Because there is, to go back to my argument about moral themes in your work, there is a constant engagement with this idea of privilege, about institutions that have become corrupted with, this is something you come...
Well, I guess when you put it that way, that's true. You mentioned the books are about, so Moneyball, when you think about, but the privilege is the privilege of it's the club of the old baseball scouts.
But more than that, Moneyball is also about the arrogance of the rich, the way arrogance has blinded the wealthier clubs. That's the other half of the puzzle in that, right?
True.
It's about how that the New York Yankees of the world have been misled by their riches. What's more What's more moral than that argument? Or
we're going to spend this whole conversation you proving the point you made in the beginning.
no, I don't want to belabor it.
What did I just say? I love bomb you, and I cave, and I say, okay, you're absolutely right. I'm a moralist.
No, this is not about me making some, ridiculous argument. God knows I do that enough. This is, and then I'm going to leave it. Years ago, when we had our thing on stage for Blindside, the other thing I said then, and I still believe, was that to me, Blindside, I thought that the book was mistitled. Remember that? That you titled it, you made it sound like it was a book about football, and it wasn't a book about football. It was a book about charity, right? It's a book about Leanne Toohey.
I think the book is about all the forces that affect the value of this child at the center.
Yeah.
And how the outcomes in this child's life are so serendipitous. That's what it is. It's a book. The football feeds into it all comes back. That's the question is structure. What's this book about? The question is why? How does this boy go from being the least valued human being on the planet, a homeless, illiterate kid eating out of garbage cans on the streets of Memphis, to 4 years later being, among the most highly prized 18-year-olds on the planet? What are the forces involved? And one of those forces is things that have happened in football strategy to elevate the value of what he could do so peculiarly well. And another of those forces is a mother that all of a sudden he had. So it all fit together for me. But you're right, it wasn't just about football.
I say that, by the way, I think that book is perfect. There's not a single word out of place. I love all your books, but that is, to me, it will be read 50 years from now. I really do believe that.
It was hardly read at the time.
That's not true. Really?
It is. Well, yes, you find when you write a book about football that people who like football don't like to read.
Anyway, we won't.
Yeah.
That it shouldn't. That was my frustration. I worried that people would think it was a football book. When I felt that.
And the few people who do read, who like football, they really, really don't want a chick flick in the middle of their football book.
Yeah, there you go.
So.
But you didn't have to be
I felt I liked shoving those two unlike things together, but it did miss its market. And the movie solved that problem. But if the movie hadn't been made, it would be my least read book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I liked it though. I'm with you. I felt very good at the end of it.
Let's talk about this one. I don't have a watch. I don't know how much time we have. Let's get to the book at least a little bit. Talk a little bit about the origins of this. I'm guessing that did this grow out of the piece you wrote for Vanity Fair on the Russian high-speed trading program? Yes.
A quick 2-minute summary of how this came about. The Russian computer programmer caught my eye, and this is in 2009. A high-frequency trading programmer in his early 30s, a Russian kid, left Goldman Sachs to work for a high-frequency trading firm and mailed himself some code. And a couple of days later, the FBI arrested him. And I followed this in the newspapers. A year or so later, he's sentenced to 7 years in jail. And so the first thing I wondered was why, on the back end of this financial crisis that Goldman had so much to do with, was the only person who went to jail, the person Goldman Sachs wanted to go to jail. It was the only Goldman employee who went to jail, was the one Goldman wanted in jail. But the thing that really caught my eye was that when they arrested him, the prosecutor said that this code, that he had to be denied bail, couldn't be let back on the streets, because this code that he had could be used to manipulate or crash financial markets if it was in the wrong hands. And I thought, Goldman's the right hands? I couldn't believe, it was breathtaking. I thought, couldn't it have been in worse hands already? But presumably that they were, and that this stuff had to do with high frequency trading, which at that time no one had ever heard of. It was a term of art that all of a sudden was in the newspapers without much explanation. It was just computerized trading. So it took me a couple of years before I came around to the story, to actually doing the story. I was doing other things, but when I got into it, I realized I needed a primer on high frequency trading, and I just called friends on Wall Street, people who were investors, and said, "Do you know anybody?" And they said, "Well, very weirdly, there's this Canadian guy who's wandering around, and you're not going to believe what he will tell you. And yes, he knows it. He's the only guy who's not an Area 51 guy who knows about what's going on with high frequency trading." So I went to find Brad Katsuyama, but really just for background, for the magazine piece I was doing about Sergei Alennikoff, the Russian. And a couple of days into it, I realized, just with him, I realized that, I was very pleased with doing a magazine piece with the Russian, but there was a book in this guy's experience. And there was a question of kind of persuading him to do it and persuading him to let me move into his life, which I did for about a year, a little more than a year. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's how it came about.
This is a small point, but I'm wondering whether it has larger. I would notice when I was reading the book that you return again and again to the question of, with each of as Katsuyama gathers his confederates around him, you over and again return to the question with each of these people about how they were changed by 9/11.
Yeah, that's what to notice. That's true.
3 or 4 times, mm-hmm. I feel like there's that. And I'm curious, I'm guessing you're that for a very good reason, but so I'd like to know what that reason is, but more broadly, I'm wondering, do you think that the fact that 9/11 was so much a calamity of the financial district in some way altered a generation? I mean, did it have a kind of material effect on the way people involved in the markets thought about what they did? Is that the point you were making by bringing it up?
No, it wasn't the point I was making, but I do think that 9/11 gave Wall Street cover to behave very badly for a long stretch, because we shared an enemy with them, but that was almost a separate point. The point I was making, one of the things I wanted to kind of get at, without actually saying it, was kind of just raise the question: why do some people in this environment decide to behave well? Why does someone who sees what's going on in the markets, a lot of people knew that the stock market was rigged. Why this Canadian guy and this group of people he brings together, why does it bother them more than everybody else? And I think the answer is more complicated than a few of them had traumatic experiences during 9/11, but all of them did have this tendency to have a long view, a perspective on their lives from kind of trying to live their lives the way they wanted to look back on it, rather than living their lives looking forward to the next bonus. So they weren't as narrowly motivated by money as others. And in a couple of cases, I think 9/11 really had a lot to do with that. Mm-hmm. That's why I kept coming back to that. The most specific, the most person's most blunt about it. He's only in the book for a little bit, but there's a kid who works for Brad Katsuyama named Josh Blackburn, and he was a freshman in college when 9/11 happened, or 9/11. He walked out of college and over to the Air Force Recruitment Center. They wouldn't take him for a year, and he ends up, anyway, devoting his life to helping generals map the battlefields in Afghanistan and Iraq. And when he comes back after, 7 or 8 years, he's traumatized because he can't find anything in the economy, for any job for his skill set that feels purposeful. Mm-hmm. He's a technologist. He got job offers from all the high-frequency trading firms. He's perfect for them. He goes in and he finds it completely hollow. I mean, like he doesn't actually want to get out of bed in the morning. Until he bumps into Brad Katsuyama, who gives him this feeling of purpose again. And they all had this need for a sense of purpose that was greater than just how well they were doing that day. And so I wanted the reader to have some clues about why they might be that way, why they were different. Because this is the question. I mean, it's why them? It's odd that the messenger in this case is odd. this Canadian guy who really is not in the center of things in the beginning decides that the world needs to know some truth that's going on, and ends up, I mean, this is the role he's going to play in life. He is essentially has walked into a place with a vacuum of trust, and he becomes a source of trust, and everybody trusts him, and the power of that is incredible. But why? Why him? And so that's those were ways to prod the reader into thinking along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Has your own feeling about, over the course of, so you've returned to Wall Street, you started off writing about Wall Street, and now you've returned to it twice.
Not to include Boomerang, then it's 3 times.
Yeah, 3 times.
That's not really Wall Street.
Have your feelings about Wall Street and financial markets evolved over that time? Are you more outraged today than you were at the time of Liar's Poker?
Yes.
What's changed?
What looked like comedy has become tragedy. When I was leaving Salomon Brothers, I had very mixed feelings about the whole thing. I thought it was silly. What bothered me then was I'd seen just too many young people who really had some other purpose in their lives be diverted into work that wasn't terribly meaningful just because of the money. And I thought that was dumb. And I thought that I could write a book then and that would show people what it was, and that they would demythologize it. Instead, of course, what I did was create an advertisement for Wall Street. It is amazing. You never know what book you've written until people read it. But 6 months after Liar's Poker, I had 1,000 letters from students at Ohio State University that said, "Dear Mr. Lewis, I've read your instruction manual, how to get ahead on Wall Street, and I just want to make sure there were no tips you left out because I really want to go work on Wall Street." So there was enough ambivalence in that. I didn't feel I was on some. I wasn't writing from a moral high. It wasn't a moral high ground exactly. It was just a distance. I had detachment. I had from it. What changed my mind was the financial crisis. What particularly started to change my mind was when all these big banks, committed suicide. When they all made all these horrible bets, and they all should have failed, or almost all of them should have failed. And I thought, because up to that point, I thought a couple of things. I thought they were exposed to market forces more than they actually were, and so that if they failed, they would fail. But I also thought how peculiar it was that these institutions that suck in the best and the brightest, they can have anybody they want almost, and these people who they suck in are not unself-interested people. That these are very ambitious, people. That when brought together, they were a failure in the way they were brought together. I thought that was interesting. But I also saw that things that seemed absurd and comic in 1987 or 1988 seemed disastrous now. How much more complex the whole system got, so nobody could actually see what was going on inside of it. The consequences for the larger economy, all that. And the kind of steady draining of the soul of the place. It's become much more corporate, much slicker. So I've just found I've become, feeling less warm and fuzzy about it.
Yeah.
And the stories, look, a lot of times you're just sort of at the mercy of the story that walks in the door. And this particular story, is so much more black and white than most of the stories I've had to deal with. It isn't a question of who's right and who's wrong. There's not a lot of middle ground. It's about a young man figuring out how the stock market works, and he shows you how it's rigged. He shows you the predatory activity that's going on. The evidence is incontrovertible, and it shouldn't be going on. And that he is attacked for delivering the truth. I don't know. So it just seemed that the interesting thing about the story you could read Liar's Poker and you could obviously say, I admire this sort of economic activity. I don't admire this sort. But there was a choice. I don't think you're going to read this to say I admire this sort of economic activity.
I have to go to Q&A. We have to go to Q&A.
Sure.
But before we do, one last bit on this. The reaction to this book has been extraordinary. Were you prepared? Is this what you expected would happen?
I did think it was an explosive story. I don't think I could have ever imagined it would be as explosive as it has been, and it's played out as theater on TV in the most extraordinary ways. And I didn't know exactly what to expect. Here's what it had going against it. What it has going against it is it's complicated, and the main character is a nice Canadian. I mean, no offense. You remember this, at the New Republic, they used to have a boring headline competition. And every week, readers would submit the most boring headline they could find in the newspapers, and there'd be a winner every week. We'd print it. At the end of the year, we went out, put all of them in a bucket, and we said, which is the most boring of the most boring? And the winner was Worthwhile Canadian Initiative.
Do you remember what came second?
I don't remember what came second.
Second was University of Rochester decides not to change name.
So
I can't believe we
So I just
beat that one.
Yeah. So I've written a book that's about a worthwhile Canadian initiative, and so I had that going against me. I feel like I deserve some credit for for taking a worthwhile Canadian initiative and putting it in the middle of my narrative, and I'm not getting that credit yet, but I will eventually.
Yeah.
What I had going for me is that there is a war waiting to happen. And it's a war over the role of the financial sector in our lives. And there've been there's one moment that crystallized the war for me. And it was, I was sitting there, I was on TV, but I was just watching it. CNBC decided the first day the book came out to stage a debate. It wasn't really a debate, but it was people shouting at each other. But I was in one room, in a midtown Manhattan, and Brad Katsuyama is on the New York Stock Exchange, sitting beside the head of one of the exchanges that's been rigged by high-frequency traders, that's owned by was created by high-frequency traders and owned by middlemen, and it's the head of the BATS exchange. And this guy proceeded to make an ass of himself. I mean, he was a crazy person, screaming and yelling, and it was very odd. But it was a story I heard after that told me that why this thing is so explosive. Apparently, a lot of the trading floors on Wall Street just stopped when this was the New York Stock Exchange just stopped when this was going on. It's now the most watched show in CNBC history, which is, it's the tallest midget, but nevertheless, it's something, right? And by the way, I try to get the word midget in every one of my books, because the first one I use it, and I got all these letters. People were offended I used the word midget, and I've got my back up against the wall about it.
One more moral stand.
There's a midget in that book, but on one of these trading floors, it was the Goldman Sachs trading floor. They're all watching. And the guy who tells me the story says, we're watching, and the guy next to me, an old Goldman Sachs guy, says the angry guy, is it true we own a piece of his exchange? And he goes, yeah. He goes, the little guy says, we don't own a piece of his exchange? No, we don't own a piece of his exchange. He goes, we're fucked. And so Wall Street realized, the smart people realized they're fucked. They're on the wrong side of the argument, and it's gonna change. And but what does that mean? That means sucking. I mean, in the narrow sector of the stock market, billions of dollars a year out of Wall Street. But this model for how a computerized financial market works has been grafted onto the treasury market and the foreign exchange market and foreign stock markets, that if a fair market becomes the model, Wall Street's screwed. It only works if there's unfairness. A lot of Wall Street just vanishes. So you've got at stake huge sums of money and the sense they're screwed. And once you get that, you get a different sort of reaction from Wall Street than you get from my previous books. And this is what it feels like in retrospect, not at the time. But in retrospect, what I have been doing is kind of blindly whacking away at a great beast with a baseball bat. And Liar's Poker was the first whack, and it didn't really bother the beast very much. I hit it someplace where its nerves were not very sensitive. The Big Short was a second whack. Again, didn't really do very much. This time I whacked it in the balls, and it just went. The beast woke up, and because I hit it where the money's made. I mean, the money is going to be taken away, and they know it's going to be taken away, and it just erupted, and it erupted in every which way. Financial journalists, part of the eruption. Anybody who's got a stake in the revenues is disturbed. So that explains the reaction.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Michael. We have time
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Now we go into the Q&A part of the evening. Just a quick reminder, questions generally start with a W or an H and sometimes a D. They are short. We do not believe in two-part questions, and only Malcolm gets to ask follow-up questions. Here's my first question.
I haven't read the book. I saw the 60 Minutes piece. Who are these bad guys with these high-speed trading trunk lines?
I'm sorry, who are the
Who are they? Who are these bad people collecting
So-
these billions of dollars? I didn't see that in the piece.
So I'm not going to name names, and I tell you why. Because the problem, as unsatisfying as it sounds, is the entire system. The point of take, where the scalp happens right now in the market, is a high-frequency trader is scalping you in the market. And that's the intake for the revenues for this system of a lot of unnecessary financial intermediation. But the revenues are shared with the exchanges, who rig the exchange for the high-frequency traders, and the banks and the online brokers, who sell, essentially one way or another, the customer stock market orders to the high-frequency traders to trade against. So identifying single villains is nuts. The minute, at some reputational risk, I kept names out on the other side. The villain is not named, not a one, because I've now had I know what would have happened. What would have happened is someone would have gotten lynched, at the best case. And the problem is, if you go and lynch one or two high-frequency traders, you're not attacking the system. The problem is, this guy is up against a system. So if you Google high-frequency trading, if you really wanted to know who the people are who are the best at scalping you in the market, but that's not, arguably they're not the villains. Arguably the exchanges are the villains because they've created this environment where they can do it to you, or the banks or the brokers are the villains because they've sold your information out to them. But if you really want to know who the bad ones are, what you really need to know, who are the high-frequency trading firms that care the most about speed. There are high-frequency trading firms that don't care all that much about speed, and there are high-frequency trading firms that care a lot about speed. The more they care about speed, the more they're involved in the bad activity. And you can Google and get the answer.
Next question. Michael, Malcolm, thank you so much for being here. I'm a big fan of both of you. Michael, I know you've been very critical of some of the Goliaths of the financial services industry. Who would you say are the Davids in the financial services industry? And also, what would people like us do, what should we do if the stock market is rigged, if Wall Street is rigged, to save for our futures, to save for retirement, etc.? Thank you.
So the book is about a David in the financial system, and it's this stock exchange called IEX. They've built an exchange that's owned by investors. The whole point of it is to create an environment where investors are not exposed to the predator. Who else are the Davids? They're the first best David, because they've actually created a kind of solution to a problem. And if it works, what you've got is a model for how you solve other problems through disruptive entrepreneurship and bringing market forces to bear in a particular market. Your own money is a different question, and it's interesting because when I say it's rigged, there's a systematic scalp that goes on every time an order enters the market. It's a penny. It's pennies. It's tiny sums of money. Spread out over the whole market, it adds up to huge sums of money. So it's not that you're never going to make money in the stock market. That's not the point. The point is that the market is found a way to tax you and all investment dollars totally unnecessarily. And it's a problem, more of a system-wide problem than it is a problem for your individual savings. As an investor, you almost should be more concerned about the instability caused by the rigging. That it's not the pennies you lose every time you trade in the stock market. It's that this whole, as the guys at Goldman Sachs say, when they decide they don't want any more to do with high-frequency trading and the current stock market structure, there's going to be a calamity if we continue down this path of exchanges making this system ever more complicated for the benefit of the high-frequency traders. What can you do? The simple answer is go on a website that IAX has created called IamAnInvestor.org, and explains how you can take control of your own stock market orders and create pressure on the banks and the brokers not to sell you out. It's already happening. I mean, it's interesting. There's a political movement going on in finance right now. In the last week, Charles Schwab has come out and said that this is a cancer on the industry that needs to be stopped. An online brokerage firm called Interactive Brokers has said they're going to now allow their customers to send their orders directly into IEX. That if the orders are moved onto fair exchanges, and I have no doubt that competition will arise for IEX, but whatever the fair exchange is, that you starve the predator, you starve the beast. So that's what you do. You try to put pressure on whatever stock market investments you have. You try to direct them away from the system.
Mr. Lewis, my question is about front running. I wasn't aware that there was such a multitude of exchanges, and front running is reliant upon the subsequent 12 exchanges after bats. So my question is, Brad Katsuyama's solution is to create an exchange which disallows front running to happen by slowing the process down. Wouldn't a simpler solution be just to have a single exchange so that the process couldn't take place at all?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. And the problem with that is the regulators believe that competition is necessary for the exchanges to be efficient. And so in the name of competition, they've encouraged this proliferation. But the fragmentation actually doesn't benefit the investor. So yes, the sensible solution is for the stock exchange to be a kind of utility, and that we all meet in one place. And that, it could happen. I mean, it could happen. I mean, one path this whole episode may take. The New York Stock Exchange has been trying for several months to buy IEX. And they've already turned down, they all could have been rich already. They've turned it down because they can't allow themselves to be sold to the New York Stock Exchange unless the New York Stock Exchange gets rid of all the bad stuff that's going on. Otherwise, it's just not credible. But if the New York Stock Exchange caves and says, we will not only will buy you, but we'll get rid of all the high-frequency traders who are in the place, no longer giving them preferential access, you'll be the New York Stock Exchange. It's easy to imagine exchanges folding, that all the business is going on in the New York Stock Exchange. You can kind of go back to the way the market was structured ages ago, but without human beings in the middle of it. So without the investment orders passing through hands at all. It's just buyers and sellers just meeting. So that is the natural solution.
So I think you kind of just touched on this a little bit, before I decided to come up here. But my question was going to be IEX. Since I guess up until now, how successful have they been at doing what they're trying to do? And I don't know if there's other exchanges like IEX, but it's just that whole. How successful have they been so far?
Well, if you talk to investors whose orders are being directed on the exchange, extremely, that all of a sudden, and the problem, as it manifests itself to investors is that they think there's a market. They think that in these 13 stock markets, say there are 10,000 shares bid for of Microsoft at $20 a share, And then they go to do it, and the market somehow anticipates what they want to do and vanishes and goes up. And it doesn't happen when they go on to IX. So they've been very successful in, the measure of how successful they've been at eliminating the predatory activity is that basically high-frequency traders don't want to be connected to them. There's no point. But the size of the exchange is still small. I mean, they're good. They're incredibly successful for a new exchange. Starting a new stock exchange always takes time. They're trading, yesterday they traded 65 million shares. It's a fraction of the stock market. It's enough so that they're profitable, or just about profitable and sustainable. But there's a break. And the break right now is that 70% of the stock market orders in this country are handled by 8 banks. Only one of those banks is actually treating this exchange honestly. The other 7 are doing what they can to avoid sending their orders onto the exchange. And so pressure has to be brought to bear on those banks to start moving orders onto the exchange when their customers ask them to.
The one is Goldman.
The one is Goldman. Yeah. The other 7 aren't behaving uniformly badly. There are different degrees of badness. But it means that, combined with the fact that none, until Interactive Brokers did this, none of this online brokerage firms are sending their orders on there either. They're starved of activity a bit, but it's changing. You can see. I mean, the book's been out 8 days. There's enormous pressure in the system for people to, if the investors ask for their orders to be directed this way, for them to be directed this way. So it's a pretty hopeful looking situation right now.
Hi, thanks for being here. So I'd like your opinion about what I look at as the 50,000-foot view, and that is when you have guys like Hank Paulson, who used to run Goldman and then was running the Treasury Department, and other former bank guys in government positions, it's sort of like the fox and the chicken coop. Regardless of all the things that are going on with high-frequency traders, if the problems stem at the top, and that is the guy that winds up going to jail is some schmuck for 7 years, and the big guys like Lloyd Plankton or other Goldman execs who are purposefully betting against their clients, and nobody's going to do anything about it because when these Fed guys are finished with their job, they wind up working for the banks. What's to be done?
You know what's amazing is that if you would have asked me that sort of question, say when Liar's Poker came out, I'd have thought you were a nutcase. And I'd thought, oh, no, God, another conspiracy guy. It's absolutely true what you said. And not only, you didn't just say it. 2 days ago, a prosecutor from the SEC who was just retiring stood up in front of the SEC and got to applause and said the problem with this institution is every one of you want to go get a higher paying job on Wall Street and you're afraid to do anything but address very small street level crime. You want to be nothing but polite to the people who are running the institutions. We have no ability to regulate it because we're corrupted by the money. And they all said, yes, they know it. It's a problem, right? So how do you solve this problem? I mean, we're kind of, you can, Brad Katsuyama, when he first discovers himself being front run, very cleverly, and is able to demonstrate it, because he's Canadian, instead of making a stink, he decides, I ought to go tell the US government because it would be rude to go and make a stink without telling the SEC what's going on because they probably want to do something about it, right? And so he goes to the SEC and describes this to him and he leaves. He thinks after the conversation in which SEC people are saying, oh, what's the problem with that? He thinks nothing's going to happen. He thinks they're never going to do anything. And he goes back to his Canadian bank and they start talking about why would they be that way? And they do a little study, and they find out that in the previous 3 years, more than 200 people had left the SEC to go to work for high-frequency traders or lobbying firms that lobbied for high-frequency traders. They say, well, maybe that's why they do that. So what do? Do you despair? Because the whole system seems to be riddled. And the industry, this problem in the marketplace, in this particular market, is a microcosm of the larger problem. And the larger problem is the industry generates so much money that it's captured, not just the regulatory process, but the legislative process. And So you could, there's no, it's, I think, futile to look to Washington for a solution to the problem. However, we live in a country where people worship entrepreneurship, love market-based solutions. So what's so clever about what this guy has done is he has created a solution that does not require really much in the way of anything from Washington. All they got to do is stay out of the way. Stay out of the way and let him provoke the war between investors, between capital and the people who are abusing the capital. And I think he'll win. And I think he thinks he's going to win. So this may be the way forward. And if you do this, if he succeeds, I think so much is at stake. If he succeeds and he has a huge, successful stock exchange, and he's gotten rich, and all the people who work for him, all of whom are young and entrepreneurial, what happens next? Venture capital pours in to do it again and again and again in different sectors of Wall Street. And then all you require really at that point is for the regulators or legislators not to get in the way of successful entrepreneurship and possibly introduce some more transparency to the marketplace so customers can make informed decisions about what they're doing. And it's fixed. I mean, I think there's a path towards a market-based solutions he has opened up, which is, that's what's at stake here, I think, because precisely what you said is true. The government's captured.
By the way, if the SEC permitted the growth of many competing exchanges because it felt that competition among exchanges was good, why didn't they also at the same time allow investors to choose which exchange they wanted?
It's a really good question. The truth is there is a rule that does allow investors to insist. It's not an SEC rule, it's a FINRA rule, which is another governing body, that allows investors to insist on where their orders go that's being broken. So the rules are being broken. I don't know what kind of violation it is. You will read about this at some point in the newspaper in the next month or two. There's a news stories waiting to be written. So the rules are actually in place. The investors aren't exercising their rights. They have no history of it. They've never asked where the order goes. They don't. It's very hard for them to find out where the order goes and how it's directed. So it's a problem. It's more of a problem of it's just historically it's never been done, and now it was a radical. It was a radical act for Brad Katsuyama to go to Fidelity or go to T. Rowe Price and say, start telling them where to send your orders because they'd never done it before, and the banks were furious that he was telling them to do that. But that's what he's done, and they're doing it. So now it's a matter of the rules being enforced more than anything else.
And our final question.
All right, last one. So after what you just said, I can see why you have some optimism that this could get turned around because the individual does have some power. But so therefore, how would you rank this against something like the Libor scandal or the municipal bond rigging, scams that like J.P. Morgan does to like places like Alabama and stuff where they get no bid contracts and stuff?
So here's what I think. So this is clearly the other thing about this story. It's of a piece with the spirit of the age in the financial markets. Everywhere you look, markets are getting rigged. The LIBOR scandal is about rigging interest rate markets. The foreign exchange is a foreign exchange rigging scandal. There are commodities price rigging scandals. Why are markets all of a sudden seeming to be so heavily manipulated by big Wall Street banks? Well, it's partly it's because they can, but partly it's because a lot of the historic sources of revenue for Wall Street have dried up. I mean, and style has been cramped by Dodd-Frank. And so part of it is a response to, it's a survival instinct, I think, in banks and the individual traders in the banks. And this is the rigging of the stock market. It's the same thing playing out in the stock market. So I think that's why it's happening. I think it's because basically technology has reduced the natural role, the useful role played by Wall Street historically, and eliminated it in some markets. And they've got to find other things to do. And one of the things you do is you rig markets.
On that note,
Right.